See if I can get this back set up. On April 20th, 1999, Eric Harson and Daniel Cabal went to Columbine and shot and killed 13 other people, injured 21 before killing themselves. At the time, many theories were thrown everywhere. The one that gained particular interest was suggested by Gerald Block, a US psychiatrist. He suggested that it was video games that caused the two boys to commit the act that they did. But to say that would be suggesting the same thing as if Harriet Beecher Stowe caused the rise in slavery with his book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's not very logical. But you could be asking yourself, why are you comparing these two? They aren't the same. One's literature, the other's a video game. And that's why I would say you're wrong in that video games are literature. And I know it's a bold thing to say that video games are literature, but with this new time and new technology coming out, the definition for literature needs to grow as well. That's why I'm suggesting a new definition, and the definition is this: a work of fiction that follows a dramatic structure that can stand the test of time. Now, we could go all night discussing different forms of literature, video games, books, movies, but since the two that we're really comparing right now are book literature and video games, I've chosen one from each of the categories to compare to this definition and to work. For the books, I have chosen J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. For the video games, to represent them, I have chosen BioShock. I will go through breaking this definition into 3 parts and working each one with each of the following ideas. The first part is a work of fiction. I think we all can agree that J.R.R. Tolkien's books belong on the fiction side of the shelf, not the non-fiction. Because, at least personally, I haven't met an elf or a dwarf, and I can't find Middle-earth on any world map. But what about BioShock? BioShock does exist, is written to be in our world, but a spin-off. A world where there is no government to rule a city by the name of Rapture at the bottom of the ocean, where the artist can do whatever he wants. The scientist is not regulated by morals. That doesn't exist in our world, thus making it fiction. So, the easy part of this whole thing is over. The second part, that follows a dynamic structure. You may recognize this illustration from English class, where you have basically the setting, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the conclusion of the story. We use this to define most books, and video games also follow this as well. In Lord of the Rings, you start off with Frodo in the Shire, as he learns that he now possesses the One Ring, the symbol of all evil. In BioShock, you start off looking at a plane crash, and you travel to this underworld city known as Rapture, where it is explained to you that this is supposed to be paradise. The turning point and into the rising action as for Lord of the Rings is when Frodo and his friends start their journey toward Mordor to destroy the One Ring. In BioShock, it's as you start learning how this city is beginning to crumble and has fallen apart at its own edges. The climax of the story is the point in the highest point of the action. For Lord of the Rings, it's when Frodo reaches Mordor and must thrust throw the rings into the fires of Mount Doom, where man has finally taken its stand against the Black Gate as a diversion to draw the Eye of Saruman away from what is happening in its own backyard. For BioShock, it's where you learn you've been controlled the entire time by the words, "Would you kindly?" You now turn against the very man that controlled you and told you to kill, told you to do heinous acts in the name of advancing in survival. The falling action is nearing the end of the story after the climax as the loose ends get tied up. For Lord of the Rings, Aragorn gets his crown, the lost king of man. Frodo goes back to the Shire, and the elves and the dwarves actually learn to work together. In BioShock, your choices during the game affect how it ends. If you committed crimes undeserving of repentance, you destroy the world with releasing rapture upon it. But if you chose to be good and to do the harder task, you actually save the little sisters. The third part of our definition is that can stand the test of time. This is a concept that has yet to really be explored. What makes a story stand the test of time? My answer to that one is simple. It must make us question who we are. Questions that we wouldn't ask normally. In Lord of the Rings, you are asked how far you would go to destroy evil. How far would you go to protect those closest to you? In BioShock, it asks a lot harder questions. What is humanity? Would you go to Rapture? Is it all right to kill this thing that is called a little sister that was once human, but is it now? What defines who we are? In conclusion with this, I see that literature needs to grow in its definition to encompass stories of video games, because video games does this third part even better than books have in the past. When reading a book, you might as well be hearing the story from a friend of an act, and you must ask yourself the questions of, did the friend do what was right in your own eyes, in your own ethics? Video games thrust you into the position where you have to make a choice. Yes, there's a restart button. Yes, you have multiple lives, but that's only so that you can try again at this question. As long as you keep the mindset that this is a video game and that this is a simulation, when you face the questions in reality and know that there is no extra lives and no reset button, you can actually answer the questions because you've already answered them in the games. Thank you.
You covered that really well.
I was thinking of a question. Do you, because I am familiar with Lord of the Rings, but not with the video game. So would you class it, does it make any difference in your explanation to consider both of these science fiction rather than straight fiction? Because it narrows it down a little bit more.
Would I consider BioShock and Lord of the Rings both to be science fiction? No, I consider BioShock to be science fiction, but Lord of the Rings I consider more to be fantasy. But again, both of them are very much literature in that they follow our definition.
So I would I would argue that there are some books that I wouldn't consider to be literature because they don't fit the stand the test of time. They don't fit the rest of the thing. Would that also come across to video games? Not all video games then would be literature, but some of them would.
Would his question being that would all video games be literature? I would agree. No, not all of them would. There are games that are very much, how to put this, mindless. Minecraft is the first one that comes to mind for me. There is no story. There is no literature to that. Thank you.
We're still here.
Here we are.